It is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker today, Karen Braitmayer, and Studio Pacifica. The team has collaborated with architects and built environment teams to help create beautifully designed, barrier-free civic, commercial, education, hospitality, medical, and multifamily residential projects. Karen's consulting practice is driven by the belief in universal design, a way of thinking about design that translates into built environments that work for people of all abilities and all ages. Most design firms are certainly familiar with codes and regulations, but few have very highly specialized accessibility professionals on staff, and in particular, professionals with lived experience in dealing with the world and its barriers. Studio Pacifica fills that role when it comes to consulting on code compliance as well as regulations, but also fills the role when it comes to showing how even a small design decision and decisions on how and what data is collected can have big ramifications for people with various physical limitations. Under her leadership and direction, the firm has grown in stature and scope over the 20 plus years. Early in her career, it occurred to Karen that as an architect and wheelchair user, it was possible for her to make a unique contribution to the field. Her professional focus on accessibility and her advocacy efforts for inclusion certainly did just that. As a registered architect, Karen was admitted to the prestigious College of Fellows by the American Institute of Architects. In 2019, National AIA honored Karen with a prestigious Whitney M. Young Jr. Award. She was the first architect with a disability to be so honored. The award recognizes architects who, quote, embody social responsibility and actively address a relevant issue. She was also appointed by President Barack Obama to the United States Access Board, which is a policy appointment, and she continues to hold that appointment today. Karen is an architect, an advocate, an activist, mentor, volunteer, nonprofit board member, and a driver behind the belief that everyone should be able to experience their best barrier-free life. I would like you to join me in welcoming Karen Braitmayer in her keynote today.
I can tell, even I can tell, the mic is on. Thank you so much, Anat. Thank you for that introduction, and it's great to be here. I'm total honor to be included. And you'll find out today I am not a transportation planner. I am an architect and a consumer of transportation. But I think my introduction alone tells you why I am passionate about mobility justice for all, and all that certainly includes mobility justice for people with disabilities. I am also passionate about all people, especially people with disabilities, being meaningfully engaged in identifying what data about current transportation environments will be collected, as well as being included in the process of using that data to drive decisions related to future transportation planning. And as the planners of this conference have so eloquently and boldly, I must say, stated, this data must be correctly utilized and efficiently applied if it's going to make a real difference. To set the stage, I'm going to share some existing data about the number of people who are served by accessible design features in transportation settings. Some people may think that people with disabilities are a numerical minority and that access serves a relative few, but that is simply not true. First slide, please. Oh, it's up. Okay, great. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen, aren't I? So, globally, 1 billion people have a disability. Perhaps you recall the brilliant campaign prior to the last Paralympics, We the 15, highlighting 15% of the global population around the world as people with disabilities, and 1/5 of that number have significant disability. Next slide, please. In the US, 25% of adults have a disability. that percentage does not include children under the age of 18. And each of those individuals are likely to have friends, family, companions who are impacted by barriers to people with disabilities, or, conversely, who benefit from the features that our regulations and codes put in place to meet those needs. We are not a small minority. We are a force to be reckoned with. Just like you, I think it's safe to say that those people with disabilities just want to live their best, full, active lives, not be limited to travel from home to work or school, or maybe just the doctor's office. Prior to the passage of the Americans with Disability Act, which passed 33 years ago, and in the scope of things, I guess maybe that's not so long, there was very little, if any, accessibility in public transportation. Back then, it was safe to say that data played a lesser role in making change, while protest and complaint fueled the conversation. I want to tell a little bit of a story. I hope you guys are all familiar with ADAPT, A-D-A-P-T, which is a disability advocacy organization. Well, in the early 80s, they went across the country demonstrating for the right to ride public transportation independently. And the story goes that they went to San Francisco, and a bunch of folks who use wheelchairs chained themselves to the front of cable cars. And of course, the police were not keen on that, so they decided that they would try to arrest the protesters, and they cut the chains, and they tried to round up these wheelchair users. But the van or bus that they brought to collect these, wild people was not accessible, so they couldn't actually even get them to the police station. Now, I don't know if that's actually just a story, because I couldn't find anywhere in the media currently about that. But I did find almost the same article in Washington, D.C., where protesters blocked city buses, and they were arrested, and they were taken to the courthouse, but they couldn't get in the door of the courthouse because the doorway was too narrow. So really, I think that goes to show that there were lots of systemic barriers at that time. Yes, in the last 33 years, the passage of the ADA did increase accessibility. Chances are you can get in the door of the courthouse or the police station. But there are still huge gaps and noncompliance with the ADA. Putting the focus on mobility justice and doing so backed by the sharing of meaningful, open-to-all data could vastly improve the reality of life for millions of people simply by identifying those design gaps. So what kinds of gaps existed prior to the ADA, and what are we looking at today? Well, I'll tell another story about something that happened to me when I was a young architecture student that illustrates how seemingly small issues can have a big personal impact. Prior to the passage of the ADA, accessible parking was not commonly available. When at my university, the architecture school building was about 2 blocks from the nearest accessible parking. Now, if any of you have gone to design school, you know that you spend lots and lots of hours in studio late at night. And I was very uncomfortable walking 2 blocks to parking. So I started parking right next to the building in a load zone. It's after hours. Who's using the load zone? But the campus police kept ticketing me. It was very frustrating. So a friend of mine got a wild hair and a couple of cans of safety yellow paint and an accessible parking sign, and you can kind of imagine, went out and actually built me an accessible parking space. And lo and behold, no parking tickets after that. Now, I do not encourage subversive behavior. If there are any students here, no. But we had to kind of take things into our own hands in those days. And I think it just shows that continuity is very important. So I'll get into that in here. When it comes to community and transportation access today, I think the primary barrier is continuity, defined as the unbroken or consistent existence of or operation of something over a period of time. As it pertains to transportation planning, I see continuity as prioritizing the completion of a travel route in an accessible manner. Continuity is something that transit systems across the country could address in a much more solution-focused way if each entity was willing to freely exchange data and share information with others. The latter is critical because the cynical part of me says that a city or region might not want to share all the warts in their system in fear of a lawsuit. That could happen. As many of you know, the ADA is not enforced by any governmental entity. It takes a person or organization to file a complaint, something that could be a really big deal for an organization. When it comes to equity in transportation for people with disability, there needs to be system-wide continuity. For a person with disability, you're constantly having to plan ahead in detail. Can I get from my home to the bus or to the light rail? Will the bus lift work? Does the sidewalk have physical gaps? Is there a slope? If the bus drops me here, can I navigate to the next block to meet the next bus? It goes on and on. Without a doubt, we are experts in identifying accessibility barriers. So today when we talk about collecting data and supporting the sharing of and common analysis of that data, what I want to know is how and who gets to decide what's going to be measured if the goal is to achieve mobility justice. If people with disabilities are not meaningfully included in that process, the issues they face every day may not be identified. We must ask and fully engage people with lived experience. We must get user feedback. Many transit institutions think they know better, unfortunately, and skip the process of working together with people with disabilities. Again, and this is the last time I'm going to say it, we must assume that all people want to live a full life, not just travel home, school, work, and back. I'm going to divert for a minute here to put in a plug for encouraging talented young people with disabilities to join built environment professions. Architecture, engineering, urban planning, access specialists, project managers, the list goes on. It starts with encouraging school career counselors to encourage young people to consider it, university programs to encourage and support young people who want that education, as well as planning directors and firm owners. We need to make our professions more accessible to young people with disabilities. Achieving equity requires the ability to recruit all types of people, and yet people with disabilities are barely visible in the built environment professions. Improving this situation could make a huge difference in terms of equity and equality in transportation. So, back to those access gaps that we talked about earlier. What do I see as the major gaps in accessibility compliance as applied to transportation facilities? Well, first, it must be said that many gaps are not due to a lack of ADA compliance. Sometimes it's about maintenance or a lack of maintenance of facilities most used by people with disabilities. Here in Seattle, by late 2020, half of Seattle's light rail tunnel escalators and elevators had become inoperable, according to the press. In the past year, the situation has definitely improved, but even a few inoperable elevators can stop many people in their tracks. A few other critical gaps that go beyond just compliance to get to true functionality to allow people to move freely and independently throughout our community. It's also worth reminding everyone here today that people with disabilities are not just those who use mobility aids like wheelchairs. Hearing, vision, cognition, and other impacts need to be equally supported. So one gap that I see is wayfinding information. It's often inconsistent. For example, visible and tactile signage must be consistently located and reliably legible. Tactile indicators of tactile signage should also be utilized on the ground plane or on walking surfaces. Tactile indicators of loading and unloading areas for transit vehicles. This supports a number of people, not just people in the low vision and blind community, but it gives everybody the opportunity to get the same information, right? That's why you provide signage in multiple formats. And this is not to say locally, some systems are really, trying this. Here in the Puget Sound region in Seattle, we're definitely moving forward with tactile guidance. I think that's super exciting. Sound Transit, WashDOT, and the City of Seattle are trying to create systems. We're still working on getting those all to be equal and connected, but it's definitely started. I think more needs to happen in that area, though. And then think about transit arrival and departure information, providing that in multiple formats. Audible and visible announcements need to be available for all travelers at transit stops, transit stations, in particular on vehicles. As a person who's hard of hearing, I'm often challenged in transit stations to understand with the acoustics in the space, and I really rely on visual announcements. These are things that you don't have to identify as a person with disability to benefit from having multiple formats of information. And then for me, I think, especially here in Seattle, I think it's that last mile connection question that is still kind of a struggle. For folks who don't drive, being able to get from their home to transit reliably is critical. And it's really, really hard to get the information about, how am I going to get from my locale, whether it's your home or your work or that pub that you went to with your friends, to the bus stop. What are you going to find on that route in between? If the terrain isn't technically accessible, and honestly, that's most of Seattle, right? Almost everything is sloped. What are the options available for that last mile of connection? This really puts pressure on more of the, I guess you call them, on sort of the on-demand transit options. I learned that today. And then I think it puts a lot of pressure on identifying sidewalks, crosswalks, other public rights-of-way areas to give people the information that they need to know what are they going to face when they try to make that trip. So to me, that's when a common language of experience could make all the difference. So how do we help people with disabilities identify routes that can be utilized? We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and some people who use wheelchairs are super strong and are interested in really powering up, a hill or down a slope, or they might have a power chair. and other people might walk slowly or have some mobility difference that makes them uneasy about walking on sloped or slippery surfaces. We should give people that choice. So the direction that you guys have been talking about today, about creating apps that can help with routing, is super important. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Imagine if you're rolling along a sidewalk and you come to a place where the two concrete panels of the sidewalk are shifted so that one is raised an inch higher than the other. So what do we call that? Is that like a surface discontinuity? Is that a vertical change in elevation? Or is it just a bump? But how do we identify for a potential, pedestrian that they're going to encounter this thing? So coming up with a term for it that is common and that everyone agrees on is super important. How does a wheelchair user experience that bump or change in elevation or surface discontinuity? Well, depending on the size of your front tires, the speed of the encounter, and the weight and balance of the chair and rider when encountering that phenomenon, it could mean a really big flip forward, or it could just mean that somebody has to take a minute and pop their front wheels up. So even thinking about this, let alone experiencing it, is kind of scary and unpleasant. So maybe this helps you see why the development of standardized language to define conditions and identify barriers across all transportation systems could really help stakeholders stay safe and feel safe. It's a way of giving people confidence that it's okay to leave their house. I was thinking last night, there was a number of years ago a hashtag that ran around social media, and I cannot bring it to mind, but it's something like accessibility fails. And I was stunned in watching that, how so many people, identified people with disabilities, said that they were afraid to try to leave their house, to go to another place. They might go to a restaurant and find there's no accessible bathroom. They might go to the restaurant and find they can't even get in the door. There's a step at the door. And they would be sitting outside on the sidewalk, and that's embarrassing. Or they might go and get on the bus, and the lift might fail, and they might be sitting on that lift waiting for someone to come fix it, and that's embarrassing and awkward and could potentially put them in the rain for a period of time. So for many people with disabilities, it's just easier to stay home. And that's sad, right? We have the ability to change that. So today, what we're talking about today, this is a huge undertaking with a potentially huge impact. Agreeing on a common language of experience allows public and private entities to collect the same data and develop methods of sharing the results with consumers in a way that consumers can understand. Another example might be like if you want to map a route from the downtown Seattle Library to Pioneer Square that's accessible to you based on your needs. If you were able to tell an app that, I need to avoid slopes of X%, but I can certainly handle bumps of a certain size, and it could calculate that route for me, no matter how long, that could be a really valuable addition to your repertoire on your phone apps. As an accessibility specialist for buildings and facilities, I know that the assessment of the accessibility of those structures is both a science and an art. Every building has conditions that are well described in our building codes and federal standards. And every building has at least a few conditions that are head scratchers, that cause us consultants to pause and make interpretations to determine how to evaluate and respond to that condition. If that is the case inside constructed facilities, imagine the multitude of conditions that are experienced in the public way. So again, how do we fill in these gaps and make travel easier and more effective for all people of all abilities? First, we must regularly ask ourselves, as the idea of a common language of data collection moves forward, what do we need to do as a group committed to mobility justice? And again, because this is very important, how can we encourage the collection of this data in a way that leads to real change? How can we build into the data collection process a mandate to include people with disabilities in the process, defining what questions are asked, what and how the data is presented? Strategically make the case to public and private entities to share information that is correctly utilized and effectively applied. To collaborate on ways to analyze and publish the data so the end result is reliable and understandable by all people of all abilities. And it needs to be said, in addition to transit systems learning from and acting on this common language of data collection, such information could also be used as a protest tool by advocates to insist on change. And that's okay too. The biggest issue of all, the one we should lead all our conversations with over the next 2 days, is this. What do all people of all abilities need in order to leave their home and safely and seamlessly get to their destination and back again? Underlying that question is this truth. All people want to live their best barrier-free life. So please remember that as you move forward over the next few days. Thank you so much.
I'm just asking, what are your present activities? I mean, it's been years. I've just seen wonderful things happening with all the regulations. But what are the next steps forward?
Well, first of all, I'm not here today representing my position on the Access Board. That's not.
You're not going to talk about that? You should.
So I have actually, so the public rights of way language is moving forward, but I have been recused from that part of the board's work because I am, I do work on that privately in my personal business. So I don't know any more than what's on the Access Board website. My office does do some work with the city of Seattle and some other agencies in terms of trying to help our community be more accessible. We're not working specifically with Sound Transit right now, I don't think. I have to think about that. So did that answer your question?
That's fine, yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you for that beautiful speech. And I really loved the ending on the positive note about, what if all of those 25% of Americans were able to fully engage in public life outside of their homes. And I'm wondering, what are the prospects for, there's obviously a large gap between the data availability, the infrastructure availability, the service availability to be able to achieve that. And I was wondering if that those sort of needs had been documented anywhere, and if there were any efforts to expand funding to be able to address them, expand ADA regulations to be able to regulate them, and what the prospects are for being able to meet those needs so that everybody can fully engage in society like they want to.
So where I see gaps is not so much in information access as there is in is it fair to say service reliability? So if I am not a regular user of Access, this like the point-to-point system, but my friends who are struggle with using that in an effective way to be able to live, as I keep saying, live a full life. Like spontaneity is an important part of being able to use transit. And a friend of mine a couple of years ago was explaining that she was trying to get from her university to her apartment, and she scheduled an Access ride, and the Access ride took her from the middle of Seattle down to South Seattle over here or whatever, just to get back to her apartment. And it was a 2.5-hour ride. And her frustration was, if Uber can get me a connection that's like point to point, like why would they have picked me up to take me all the way around? Why didn't they wait till they got back closer? Now, that's anecdotal, so I have no data to support that. But I think that the hard part is that kind of story goes around really fast in the disability community and makes it really hard for them to feel confident about using a transit system, like a point-to-point system, if you don't have to. So it's a little bit like there's so much press around how airlines damage wheelchairs. And they do damage wheelchairs. There's no question about that. But I have flown for 10 years prior to the pandemic. I was flying at least once a month and more than that. And I did, I flew many times and no damage to my chair. So what we don't see is all the good stuff that's happening. And so that's where like the information flow about transit is hard to be able to judge, like, is the information accurate or not?
It's best to sit down in the chair correctly. Thank you so much for all the wonderful thoughts you had. One thing you said, I'm Thomas Craig with WashDOT, I'm a data analyst, that was really interesting to me was you mentioned in your architecture work the head scratcher moments in any building that you encounter, despite so much being defined well in code. And it occurs to me, we're going to have head scratchers forever. Like, in 20 years, there will be new accessibility issues that we don't recognize today that we'll be addressing, and many that we already recognize and haven't fixed yet, I'm unfortunately sure. I'm curious, though, like, in the approach to head scratchers generally in your architecture work, like what are the best practices for how to navigate that situation that you don't have yet the language to, and how do you in the architecture world kind of think of those difficult moments and collaborate towards the best possible accessible solution?
Thomas, that's a really interesting question because that is something that we struggle with all the time. So, the codes and regulations, so certainly the federal government, they move at a very slow pace to update their language. The building codes move at a little bit faster pace, but there's still, a certain amount of lag time. And I think when questions come up, what we do as an office is that we actually, first of all, we try to stay closely connected with the disability community and try to sort of keep our ear to the ground. What are people wishing and asking for in terms of solutions? We ask a lot of questions of that community, like, what do you think about this as an option? What do you think about that as an option? But we also go back to our colleagues who are doing this across the country, and we try to say, I have a network of colleagues / friends that I call and go, oh, I just saw this. have you seen that before? What would you think? You know, and because I think great minds come together, come up with good options. And then we have to interpret, we have to look for the closest condition that is available in the language and try to interpolate from that what the guys who wrote the language, the folks that wrote it, might think. And then we take our best, we make our best opinion, you know, judgment, I guess. I thought 20 years ago I would just teach the local community about accessibility and I'd be out of a job, right? You're done. Because, like, how hard is it to learn? I'm still doing that. And every day I run into something that I go, oh, I hadn't thought of that one, you know. So it's an ongoing process. And also, the other thing we have to remember is that the way people with disabilities engage with the built environment has changed dramatically over the last 30 years. Our mobility devices have changed. Our use of technology has changed. So all that is moving at super fast rate, right? And so people are expecting an interaction that's different than, 20 years ago.
Thanks. Yeah. So Phil asked, it's been a challenge with an OpenStreetMap to develop an accreditable standard for curbs and sidewalks, and even to agree to ingest data recently collected by municipalities. How do you think OpenStreetMap can make it easier to and more efficient to develop a standard, ingest data, and ultimately have more coverage?
I'm terribly sorry, but I couldn't understand that question. Is it possible for you to rephrase it, or could somebody repeat it to me closer?
I can pass the mic off to someone if you want to repeat it closer.
Let me, well, my own disability, I can't see squat, so sorry about that. So where are we?
It's this question.
Okay. It's been a challenge with an OpenStreetMap to agree on standards for curbs and sidewalks. So that's not surprising. Everyone has a different idea of, oh, how would we describe that? I think you did a good job of describing that in your in the change in sidewalks. How do you think the OpenStreetMap community can make it easier and more efficient to develop those standards and then help ingest the data so that we actually have coverage? So we have a community in OpenStreetMap that is trying to reach the standard that you're interested in, and you just did a great job of describing. How do we make it more efficient to come to agreement on how we're going to describe that surface discontinuity? Because that's the only one I can remember.
Well, it seems to me that you kind of have to start with that you have to start with some of the language. So you have to come up with some, like, I don't know, get a group together or something or other to come up with some framework of language that you can use. Then you can send that back to the folks who are investigating the data to try to find more of the things that meet that, surface discontinuity, whatever. And then you would go back and evaluate and include more terms. I don't know. I kind of feel like that's a question for Anat and her team. Because maybe in my professional life, I've always had a framework to start with, because I had the codes, I've had the regulations that have given me that, like, start to the process. So, I don't think that quite answered the question, but
I'm not sure there was a real easy answer to the question. I think that was a good start to it.
thank you.
Hello, Brian Jennings from Cambridge Systematics. My partner has a background as an O&M, And, that's fostered a lot of really good discussions over the years about equitable access to transportation. And one of the things that I've thought about is, vocational rehabilitation specialists and O&M specialists often end up being people that fill in the gap to help people understand how to get from point A to point B. They're teaching from a child all the way up to seniors how to get around. But it seems that the people that are writing the codes to build the buildings and the people that are building the technology often do it in their own bubbles, and then the O&Ms or the vocational rehabilitation people have to come in after the fact and then partner with the person that's trying to get access to try to understand what people did and then help them to find a way to be able to access and wherever they're trying to go to through these different solutions that people have put together. Is there any, I guess, work being done to try to bring those communities together so they're all speaking together in real time, and so that they can actually, kind of act as translators, since they're basically the boots on the ground?
I think so the question was around engaging a broader range of people who understand the needs of people with disabilities, like rec therapists and O&M instructors. These people are working with the folks who are potentially learning new ways of moving through the community. And yes, I think that actually I hadn't really thought about that. Now I know that that there are some people involved in the process, but boy, we certainly could use more. And as much sort of the broadest range of people at the table is going to give us the best design. So I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so this is such a great flow of questions. My name's Doreen Cornwell. One of the hats I wear is the Washington Council of the Blind Advocacy Committee. And one of the things I'm not doing today to be here is to be at a reception for people just admitted to where I went to college. And last year, they all wanted to study computer science, and I wanted to say, you are not all going to wind up majoring in computer science. A lot of you are still going to wind up working about technology. And I say that from a perspective of my actual background is in foreign languages, but one of my favorite classes in college was a civil engineering prof who let me take his ethics class, even though I had I had kind of marginal physics and math background. And he said after the class, he's like, well, you didn't write a really great paper, but you asked so many questions in class that everybody else got paper topics. And I want to say that both because the point about people from different disciplines knowing each other's language, or knowing, in linguistics world we call that domains, and knowing what the terms are. When I became legally blind and stopped trying to write code, I went, oh crap, there's a whole bunch of lingo I need to learn. Actually, I want to do live data collection, and I need Laura to help. Earlier, people were talking about PROAG. How many of you know what it is? Stick your hand up or make some noise. About 5 hands. Okay, so we can all talk. I'll be glad to tell you what PROAG is after. And I want to say, since Matthew's sitting right next to me, Karen's anecdotal data about there's a certain unplanned aspect of some aspect rides that's not the kind of spontaneity you want. It's when the goal is to go from Ravenna to church in the Rainier Valley, and you take a tour over to Redmond and Kirkland, and you didn't really plan on that sort of tourism, but what the heck, it's what your paratransit provides. So that is we can't dismiss anecdotal data. The question is, can you go out and look for more data like it? And since I sit on the Access Paratransit Commission, I kind of understand some aspects of, say the contract that might kind of help lead to this, and the labor shortage, and people have a bunch of different excuses. So my last soapbox is play music, because there's all these different pieces that have to work together, and sometimes you just gotta, like, it just helps to think about playing music. So thank you all for letting me speak.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you so much for the talk. My name is Ruben Lozano. I'm a product manager at focusing more in mobility for Google Maps. And I think that the business case for building an application for accessibility is pretty much like it's understood, right? Like there's no more that you have to fight for that. But I was thinking, I was looking if you could share maybe some examples of initiatives or efforts where you have worked on, where you can show success of the changes that you're making. And I think that's something that we've been struggling, like how do we know that whatever we're doing is actually working?
I think that's one of my big anxieties, I guess, is when my firm in particular, or teams I work with, are trying out new things based on hopefully advice by folks with lived experience, but recognizing that, of course, all that stuff has to be balanced by cost and the ability to actually complete it, and is the material available and stuff like that. I would really, really love to be able to mock everything up and like run a huge group of people through that sample environment and say, is this better? Are you liking this better? Is this working? That would be ideal. Does that happen? Hardly ever. So we have to take it in small pieces, try little bits incrementally, and see, let's just talk about tactile material on the walking surface that might guide someone to the front door. How do you try that? And if you put it down and it doesn't work, then what? So those are the struggles that we see in our work, and I think can have like that. I can see why that might make a transit system nervous to try something new, unless they can get some confidence and buy off in the community, and from the regulators that it's going to be accepted. But I just feel like the process has to move forward. If we just sit on what we have on paper today, it's not enough. It's not. We are not done. And the one thing I can say from my knowledge as a participant in the Access Board work is that everyone involved at the Access Board knows that it's not done, that there's more to go. It's a very lengthy process to continue to evolve, but that's the goal.
I have a question about any practical experience or thoughts you have about learning from the experiences outside the U.S., particularly from parts of the world that are ahead of the U.S. in terms of aging, where they're confronting these issues more dramatically than we are right now. Just love to hear from you on that.
Certainly, there are many countries that are doing that have standards that are not yet implemented here in the U.S. I just remember probably 6 or 7 years ago wandering through downtown Oslo, and they have a beautiful opera house that's out near the water, and they have tactile material that goes from the sidewalk to the entrance of the opera house across this big pier and everything. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Why don't we do this? So there now they also have very aggressive tactile surfacing on their curb ramps, which is really hard to roll over. So they must have a very vocal, low vision and blind community there are pluses and minuses. And in Europe, it's very common that all the accessible features around toilet rooms are located in a separate, what we might here call an all-gender toilet room. I arrived in Europe, I got in line in the ladies' room, walked in, there's no accessible features. And all the folks in line, all the ladies in line were like, oh, it's out there. Now, in the US, if you had an all-gender restroom and 2 segregated sex restrooms, you would have 3 accessible features, 3 accessible toilet stalls, accessible sinks and stuff like that, but not so in Europe. So is that better or worse? Personally, I think it's not as good as what we have. So, we have to kind of take all that stuff and kind of evaluate it based on what our standards are.
All right.
Well,
With
thank you very much.
I would like to join me again in thanking Karen.